Hi, if you're here for the presentation, Does Candy Affect Emotions? Let me be the first one to tell you. This is not what this presentation is about. So get out now if you have a queasy stomach and you get bored easily. But your question is, what is this presentation about? Well, you're in for a treat. This is for cannibalism, right or wrong, by me, Joey Tejada. Joey, as in kind of like the baby kangaroo, even though it's not spelled the same. It's spelled Joie, not Joey. But back to the point, my name is Joey, and I will be your host today. Hi, welcome to my presentation. So through the years, cannibalism has been seen as wrong, and honestly it is. We're not made to be able to eat other human beings, hunt them down, and see them as good livestock. But what is it really? What causes it? And are there any exceptions to this cannibalism? I think that you should keep in mind morals. It's against human nature and it's not a natural instinct for us. You're not born as a baby seeing another human and immediately thinking, oh, they look good with mashed potatoes. No, that isn't good. So the actual definition of cannibalism is the act of eating one of your own. It's usually seen as ceremonial, ritual kind of thing, but the most important thing is this third point right here, choosing to do so. You're consciously making this decision. Now, half the time, cannibalism is viewed as you're consciously making this decision while you have other options available to you. So let's get into this. When it originated, the origin is unknown per se, but there are fossils and evidence seen worldwide to support that cannibalism was a worldwide thing. Everyone did it in the BC era. Thus it's seen in our earliest ancestors. What it's commonly used for is to initiate fear, and this is usually during war, to pretty much dehumanize, saying, hey, it's kind of mostly symbolic, saying, hey, you guys are just livestock for me. We are just gonna kill you and eat you. You are nothing human. We are not on equal ground. It's also seen as love, that it's a promise. Making a contract with your loved ones, seeing them, having them continue living on inside you. And it's also seen as getting closer to family. Many females, even today, actually eat each other's placebo in hopes to be closer to another family member. It's symbolic, once again, going back to fear, but also symbolic in love. But most of the time it's also due to the religion of a person. And once again, war, going back to fear, there are some religion that you can get a war prisoner. It's a good symbol to kill that war prisoner and eat them. So on the survivor mode, there is actually a good example that on October 24th, 1765, there was a Peggy and 8 men were aboard this Peggy as well as some cargo. But supplies, it was not enough. Why? There was a storm that left the boat stranded. For 2 months, no food. They even ate their own clothing, the buttons on their shirts, leather from their boots, belts. Let me give you a question. What would you do if you were given in that situation? Would you sit there and starve, or would you, do anything to survive from that? On the Peggy, there was a slave that was considered as cargo. The slave was killed and eaten, and the 8 men made that last for 16 days, as long as they possibly could before they started to go hungry again. But sadly, they were not rescued within that given time, so they started to draw lots, kind of like the lottery. Put a piece of paper in the hat. Person that had a red X was the one next to be killed. But the next person that was assigned to be killed was actually a respected man. But luckily, the next day, the Peggy was rescued, and no one else had to be eaten. But when the men were rescued, they admitted to eat human flesh and they did not consider themselves as cannibalisms. But are they cannibalism? The law overlooked this. They did a humane way of dying, a shot to the head. No one had to suffer. There was no torture there. They drew lots, and that was considered as fair. There was no biasm there except for the slave, but the slave was considered as cargo. So there was no, hey, we don't like you, you're going to get eaten, and you're going to like it. It was fair. When they set to sail, the sailors do have unspoken rules that they'll do anything to survive. There's danger, and there's always a possibility of death and never returning home again. So survival broken down, we are not naturally cannibalistic. Hunger becomes starvation, and that pretty much means that blood cells are unable to deliver food throughout our bodies. Starvation, the body begins to slowly use its own reserves. Sugars and carbs go first. Fat reserves go first, which means you become just skin and bone, and slowly protein starts to be eaten. And there's a quote from a video that I have put a link to on my site sources. That's the third point, that the protein means it's pretty much lighting your house on fire to try and keep warm. You're basically eating yourself alive. That's the final stage also. So also when the protein is eaten, you start to get weak, but you're still able to function. So even more so, if there's still no food, the body begins to shut down and only keeps what it needs to survive. That's your brain, your lungs, and your heart. If there's still no food, the cerebral cortex begins to shut down, and that's the outer layer of your brain. And that holds human emotions, ethic, logic is all gone, and you begin to go on full-on survival mode. And at this final stage, that's when cannibalism become okay. Okay, so that pretty much means you get pushed. Given the circumstances, the Peggy men were pushed to their limits. They had the will to survive. The beast inside began to come out in a way of, hey, we need to survive. The outer brain of the cerebral cortex was shut down, and they were left with, similar to a reptilian brain, as said in the video that I put on my sources, become like a reptilian brain that you just need to live. And that's surviving, but does that make them cannibalists? No, that is surviving. They had no choice. They couldn't consciously they either had to die, or they had a will to survive. Once again, reptilian brain. He had no choice but to do that. And why were they not considered cannibalists? Because they did a human way of dying. They prolonged as long as they could. They went 2 months without food. They ate their own clothing, for goodness sake, and they also admitted to human flesh. As well as when they were rescued, they also knew the circumstances. So they knew that if something like this were to happen, they knew that it might have to come down to these certain circumstances. So once again, surviving the circumstances, it was understandable, and death, it was inevitable, but they tried to prolong as long as possible. They had to survive because the body was shutting down. They weren't able to think right. And after this, there were no records of them doing it outside of this given situation. Now, let me take you on a journey. Imagine that you were on the vast ocean, right? But all of a sudden, a storm comes into your boat, leaving you thus stranded in the middle of the ocean with the sun beating down on you. And you are just so hungry, and you're crawling, you're barely even functioning. And you start looking at each other like this, like little Donald Duck here, so